Hope I have a voice. That was so beautiful, Lori. Thank you. And I'm so honored to be giving this talk tonight. So, and I really appreciate Nancy and Newt for inviting me to do it. As a family member in the system, I've learned to not put my personal business out there. So this has been out of my comfort zone. And I've really appreciated the process. So I wanted to share how my practice has been an anchor and a true refuge in these recent dark times of mine, and how we might alleviate suffering and create benefit without depriving the soul of its growth. So I want to give you my best. So because I'm a writer, I'm going to read little bits of it. So enjoy, I hope. I want to open with an excerpt from the third Zen patriarch, which I'm sure you know, but it's foundational. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind. So, little personal background here. I grew up in the Midwest, and I love the wide open prairies and the smell of Kansas land, especially on warm summer nights. I love the cicadas and the crickets, and the Milky Way was so dark in those days. It was just this dream of milk across the sky. I grew up in a small Orthodox Jewish family who was very dedicated to community service, and they were very charitable. In fact, my maiden name actually means storms racing over fields of grain. My dad's mother came from Poland in the early 1900s, and she used to tell teaching stories. They had a small dairy farm in northern Oklahoma, and they were the only Jews in miles and acres. But they always gave to everyone, even though they didn't have that much. And they had a small dairy farm, and even in times of depression, they made sure every neighbor had milk, even if they couldn't pay for it. And my father's father was a grain merchant from Ukraine and ended up a grocer in Kansas. And during the 30s, during the Depression, he performed the highest form of charity in Judaism, which was to give to people without letting them know actually they were giving. And he used to have a truck of potatoes, and he'd go to someone and say, "Hey, Jake, I really need your help. Could you take these potatoes off my hand? I've just got too many of them." So that's how I was raised. And in my congregation, there were outfit survivors with numbers on their arms. And because we also lost family in the Holocaust, I grew up with the Diary of Anne Frank. That was my favorite book, and it's why I became a writer. And it's the background of why I've been an activist most of my life and got involved in the system here. So I spent decades studying racist and white supremacist history. And I followed my dad's footsteps into the newspaper business in 1968, when synchronously and interestingly, my intern project was actually an investigation of how and why juveniles were held in jail and being tried as adults. So that was kind of prophetic. So I went to college in Madison, and I discovered Buddhism in the summer of 1969 through a lecture by Ram Dass. And he spoke of the devotional path of love. He spoke of bhakti yoga, and he spoke of karma yoga. And he quoted the great Sufi poet Kabir: "Do what you do with another being, but never put them out of your heart." And he also said that every experience is grist for the mill. And this was the first time I ever heard about karma or reincarnation or liberation, awareness, any of it. But I became mesmerized, and that was the beginning of my path. So after I graduated from Madison in 1970, I moved to the Bay Area with a reporting job in the East Bay. And then in 1987, I joined the San Francisco Examiner. And I met a very funny photographer who became my best friend and eventually my husband. My parents passed in 1992 at age 70, and they passed 5 weeks apart. on Thanksgiving and New Year's. So it was very devastating, but I pursued and finally was given permission to do a 9-part series for the Examiner on caregiving, and it actually was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, and that got me a book contract. And I published in 1999 a book called Caregiving: The Spiritual Journey of Love, Loss, and Renewal, and that was also nominated for a Pulitzer. And that's not bragging about it, but it's just I want to give you some background of what I felt I could offer to the system when I became an activist here. So in 2006, my husband died of lung cancer. And when I was going through his things, I discovered a lot of very devastating things like, serial adultery, substance abuse, porn addiction, pedophilia, and possibly another family. So I became very suicidal. I'd had a pretty nice life up until then, and then blammo. So I went into therapy, and I also started rock climbing and doing some other things. So I'll fast forward into 2011. My therapist actually posted something on Facebook, which I happened to see, and she was asking to hand off writing to an inmate in solitary confinement in Pelican Bay. And he wanted to study transpersonal psychology and maybe write a handbook for grief for other inmates. So I said yes. And this was a Pacific Islander who had spent quite a few years in solitary. And so I wrote him in a very upbeat letter, and he responded with amazing insight and maturity, I thought. And he thanked me for my kindness, which surprised me. Why would he thank me for my kindness? But he had been in isolation since 1995, mostly in Pelican Bay, where the department liked to brag it confined over 1,000 of the worst gang members and associates under indefinite and lengthy terms. Well, back then you didn't have to break any prison rules to get thrown in the shoe. It could be a photograph in a magazine, or a birthday card, or a piece of Aztec cultural artwork, a confidential informant, a grudge. And there was no due process to confront any accusations. And at that time, committee reviews were every 6 years, and pretty much everybody got revalidated. So there was no revolving door. You didn't get out. And they would say there was a book written that the only way to get out was to parole, snitch, or die, in their terms. So excuse me. So like the others that were held for decades, he never saw, for 20 years, he did not see the sun or the moon or a tree, even though Pelican Bay was carved out of a very lush redwood forest, once inhabited by Toloa and Yurok tribes. These men never heard a dog bark, or an ocean wave, or a baby crying, or a kind word. Once in a while, a leaf or a feather would fall down into the cement dog run. There was a very high tarp up above. And he wrote me once about just standing in the rain one time just so that he could feel alive, to have that nature pouring down on him. So all the things that make us human, conversation, connection, community, creativity, everything was denied these individuals. And even though the shoes accounted for only 10% of the department's population, they accounted for 70% of the suicides. So he began mentioning a possible hunger strike, saying that the shoe was torture and violated constitutional rights, and they had no meaningful access to work or education or anything, social activities. So I started educating myself on policy, on Title 15 and the Penal Code, and landmark legal cases like Plata and Coleman, and I read thousands of articles, and I sent a lot of them in to the guys so they could stay informed as to their rights and any revises pending to legislation or regulations. So there were 3 peaceful protests in 2011 and then 2013, where the third one, there were 30,000 individuals in the system who joined up, and they all crossed their racial lines and their gang divisions based on race that the department put up like that. And they offered, they had 5 core demands and 40 supplemental demands, and they were things like better food and calendars and sweatsuits and better debriefing and gang validation process and procedures. So during that time, I also joined advocacy groups, and I helped found 2 grassroots groups, and I became part of I helped resuscitate the Inmate Family Council of Pelican Bay, and we were able to get something that was so historic. We were able to get the first Inmate Family Council tour of the SHU. I mean, it had never been done, and we got it done, and it was amazing to stand there at the crossroads of the short corridor, which is where they housed the worst of the worst, and the guys who somehow courageously and amazingly organized these peaceful protests. But there I was at that same place, and I just saw that they were locked and trapped in this maze of concrete inhumanity and absolutely deliberate indifference. It was a life-changing 2 hours. So in 2015 in September, we won our class action lawsuit against the CDCR, who was found guilty of violating the 8th and 14th amendments of due process and cruel and unusual punishment. And we were part of the Asher settlement. He was the 79th, I'm not using names, so that's why I'm going to say he was the 79th longest held at 21 years in the SHU. And so 1,500 individuals got out from September on, and he got to Salinas Valley at Thanksgiving of 2015, and we had our first contact visit about 3 weeks later. And I joined right away. I joined the Inmate Family Council, and we got married the next July 16, 2016. And at Salinas Valley, we did incredible things. We instituted the first annual tour of the entire facility, every facility, the entire prison. The first tour, our wonderful warden spent 4 hours with us, going to we just went everywhere, and you could see how beloved he was. And we talked to the guys, and we went everywhere. So I became chair eventually, and we did all kinds of things. We overhauled visitor processing. We instituted surveys to get better food and cleaner bathrooms, and we got TVs for the lobby and the visiting rooms. We got decoration. We were able to do decorations in the rooms for backgrounds for photos. And we worked with the inmate advisory councils on agenda items and just all kinds of things. And this was what he and I did together. And so much of this was coming from him and from the guys. So he would write me, he had been writing like 30, 50, 70-page letters for years, just a lot of writing and opening up. And he wrote constantly about his transformation and feeling free within and deep practice, I felt. So I used to visit him all the time, and we took care of other families there. And I'm going to skip through a bit, but he was just always very respectful and very loving and caring about other families. We bought food for them. We gave them photo tokens, and we hired a jailhouse lawyer to file some 602s on his behalf to see if we could get some credits restored and get his time down. So, and then COVID hit and closed the prison. So before that, though, in 2018, I had been an athlete all my life. And in 2017, actually, I started to lose my legs. And my mom had died of Lou Gehrig's disease, and my dad had died of spinal cancer. So I thought that's what was happening, but it took months to find out that I had some benign tumors compressing my spinal cord. So I was almost completely paraplegic. And I spent 31 days in the hospital in September 2018 with major surgeries to remove the tumors. And then I had radiation, and I had to stop visiting for quite some time. I had to resign my position on the IFC. And so moving forward, again, because I want to get to the practice, last year he got a recalculation of his time and got a new date, and he told me it was July 19th. was incredibly exciting. But he told me that because he was a high control parolee, he had to parole out to Southern California, where he was from before, that he couldn't parole out to me up here in the north. And he had to go to transitional housing, and he couldn't be picked up. He had to go in a van, and he could get transferred in about a month, and might be a few days before he could get in touch with me because he'd be on probation. But we agreed that I'd go down there and be there when he was given permission. So I went down. So he called me on July 14th saying that, yes, he was getting out the next week. And I happened to look on July 16th on our anniversary. I happened to look at the inmate locator, and I discovered he wasn't there. So, oh my gosh. So I left. I went down there, and I waited for his call, and I waited, and I waited. And after about 10 days, I knew something was really wrong, but I thought the department was depriving him. And I called Nancy and Edwin and Nalini, and some other resources. And I found out that Monday morning that he'd gotten out the day after he called me. And that I found his parole officer who said that he never mentioned he was married, and he never mentioned anything about a transfer. And in that moment, it was like my whole bubble burst. I was completely devastated, completely shocked, completely betrayed. And I also I felt this bliss of understanding why we weren't visiting, why he wasn't writing, why he wasn't calling. It made so much sense. But the real kicker was finding that he was engaged to somebody else, that he had walked out, and I don't know how long he'd been seeing her, but she was much younger and voluptuous, and they posted that on his Facebook page, which I didn't even know he had. So I came back up here in 9 hours, and I filed for divorce. So I want to move on to the process, because that's really what I wanted to talk about today. So I have kept coming back to the lines that I just said at the beginning, which is the great way is not difficult to those who have no preferences, and never put anyone out of your heart. And I will say that for some time it was because I had finally achieved that, which is why I can be here tonight. I wanted initially for him to suffer as much as he had caused me. And almost in that moment, I realized, wow, I cannot even fathom the level of suffering that he has. And I have no business even thinking that. And I dropped it. I just dropped it. And I had some friends who were not Nalini, but who were demonizing and dehumanizing him. And I couldn't do that, because I'd watched that from the shoe. That was what all my activism was about, was humanizing. So I realized that I wasn't going to create more suffering, but I had to find the way out of this darkness. So I'm a bird photographer, and I used to send in a lot of pictures that the guys put on their walls and their windows. And I love there's in Buddhism, there's the image of the two wings. And I like to look at that as we live in between the pairs of opposites, the light and the dark, the joy and the suffering, that we have to have both of those wings. Birds have to have both of those wings to fly, and we have to have both of them to be whole. We can't do without the other. We can't set one against the other, as the third Zen patriarch says. So for me, that suffering is that imbalance where we allow that part of our mind to keep judging and hating and just tormenting ourselves with those second arrows that I know Jill and Bruce talk about a lot in sangha. So for me, the Four Noble Truths really are true, that there is a path to liberation for suffering. And I realized that is, for me, what this has all been about. It's not about him, and it's not about the story. And I only shared all that to set the background for it, so that you could understand that of my own intense suffering, which I don't say is more or worse than anybody's. It's not, but it's just mine, you know. So I know, you know, Father Greg Boyle of Homeboy Industries, and I read all of his books in the past 6 months, but he says before the truth sets you free, it tends to make you miserable, which is really true. So, you know, getting what we want can cause suffering because we fear losing it, and not getting what we want causes suffering, and then you know, getting what we don't want can cause suffering. So all of the mindfulness, the eightfold path has really been instrumental to me. So I wanted to share what I came up with and what I realized in doing this talk, to share what I hope is helpful. So number one is right understanding about suffering, karma, and impermanence. Because I didn't get what I thought I wanted. But once I understood what I really want, which is so much more than that, which is truth and liberation, it doesn't condone his actions, but it forgives. I forgive his humanness because we all share the same. So it's a reverence that I found, this understanding that I mentioned about not wanting to cause him or myself more suffering by my judging. It's a reverence for the weight carried by those similarly situated, and all of you who have come home, those that we marginalize and those who are so traumatized. So number two, right thought means to be free of ill will and vengeance by cultivating thoughts of harmlessness and compassion. So I consciously choose every day to not throw him away and to punish him with hateful thoughts and judging, because his family and society and the department did that his whole life. So I can't do that. So this means purifying my mind of unwholesome thoughts, which can become very addictive. They're familiar and they're comfortable like old shoes, you know, but this is not a true refuge. So number three, right speech is free of abusive and harsh language. And I did buy into that. I think that's just a normal reaction. I'm human, and I was really, really devastated and hurt. But I've deliberately stopped calling him names. I stopped gossiping. It's why it was hard to even prepare this talk, because I really don't talk about it. Not because I'm running away from it, but because I don't want to. The story is just not what it's about anymore. And it's not about me. So number four, right action traditionally means harmlessness or ahimsa. But for me, it meant taking action to divorce him, not out of vengeance, but out of love for myself. Again, do what you do, but don't put anyone out of your heart. And to me, that is right action. So right effort, number five, means training the mind to cleanse out impurities such as the 5 hindrances, which include ill will and doubt and unwholesome states of mind that are morally bad. So all actions and thoughts that are attached to any preferences create karma, and that can be negative or positive, that can be merit or punishment. So it was not my place to punish him further. In the Bible, it says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And that was coming a lot too, is that it's not up to me. It's up to a much more divine intelligence than this hurt, self-pitying mind, you know. So number 6 is right livelihood. I gave up all my work and my livelihood for his homecoming, so I don't have any actual livelihood at the moment. So this one I very sadly apply to him, because I'm undeniably certain that his livelihood is not morally correct. I think I know what he's doing out there, but again, that's speculation. So 7 is right mindfulness, which means training how to stay more present and to keep my awareness from being hijacked by distractions of these unwholesome thoughts. It means to befriend myself. It means to keep witnessing my thoughts. And it's a very hard practice, but that's what we all do, right? And number 8 is right concentration, which means gently reminding myself to return to the present moment and not dwell on the past, on the story. We keep repeating that over and over, you know, if only or what if. But it means to me staying centered as I can, which is kind of a razor's edge, but to stay centered between those wings. So my life is my practice, and it is the Buddhist path of karma yoga, which is work on ourselves as an offering for the benefit of others. It means using every experience as a vehicle for transformation. And it's a way of understanding that whatever we do has consequences, which to me is what karma is. So it doesn't matter if we call them big or small, because it just a minute amount of poison can kill someone, and a tiny little seed can grow into a giant sequoia. So that kind of judgment isn't wholesome, because everything we think, everything we do has consequences. So Jack Kornfield, who's a wonderful teacher I know you're familiar with, says that part of the process of meditation and spiritual practice is to come to a rest in our being, to a center that is unshakable. It doesn't mean that it doesn't move in the wind, but that there's a place in the heart of trust where we've touched an ability to feel all the things of life and to accept every one of those. Then we can see things with a fresh mind, fresh ears, and fresh eyes. So I'm really zipping through a lot of this. I hope it's making sense, but what I'm left with is gratitude. I'm very grateful that I didn't get what I thought I wanted, because it was not what was best for me. And it's the only life I can live is mine. But I know that I became a better person because of him. He taught me so much that is sacred forever. He taught me patience. He taught me unconditional love. He taught me loyalty and perseverance and fearlessness and courage and strength and compassion and service and loyalty and commitment. So I bow to him, I honor the love, and I release what no longer serves. And I remain in endless gratitude for our efforts in making a difference in a system that is so broken and so inhumane that it continues to punish and marginalize and destroy those who are the most marginalized and traumatized. So I'm grateful that I could do anything at all. I want to end with a couple of quotes. One is from the Greek philosopher Aeschylus, who wrote, "Pain falls drop by drop upon the heart until, in our own despair and against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." I love that. So I want to quote from the Buddha. "We are what we think. All that we are arises within our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you, as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you as your shadow, unshakable. Look how he abused me and beat me, how he threw me down and robbed me. Live with such thoughts, and you live in hate. Look how he abused me and beat me, how he threw me down and robbed me. Abandon such thoughts and live in love. In this world, hate never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible." And so it is. Thank you all so much. I appreciate your attention.